Welcome to Rethinking Youth Ministry, where each week we hope to raise the bar for youth ministry by asking questions, interviewing thinkers, and having real and honest conversations about what it looks like to lead the next generation. I'm CJ, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Ashley.
Hello.
Gerald Fediomi.
Yo, yo.
And Jamie Dickens.
What's up, what's up?
Now, Ashley, Jamie, you guys are kind of like old souls here on the podcast already. You're young, but you're podcast veterans here on Rethinking Youth Ministry. But
I received that, CJ.
Okay.
But what if people don't know who I am, CJ?
Well, we'll get to promoting your social media stuff later. They can find what you think, all right? We'll plug all that. Don't worry. I know that's what you're primarily worried about.
Just kidding.
I know. But Gerald Fediomi, this is your first time on the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast.
Woo!
You're no stranger to student ministry, though. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I prefer to go by Andy Stanley. So if you could just call me Pastor Andy for the rest of this podcast.
Right. That's
great.
We're gonna put
listen.
This podcast is with Andy Stanley. We'll make sure that's in the title so we get some clicks.
No, I do student ministry here in Atlanta. I actually get to work with Jamie on a pretty regular basis, which is a blast. Love doing student ministry. Got married a year and a month ago.
Nice.
It's the love of my life, and I just love Jesus, love students, love getting to invest in them and pour in them and build the next generation of the church. So
how long have you been working with students now?
Gosh, 6 years.
Okay.
Three and some change in full-time student ministry, and then 3 years at the YMCA prior to this.
Awesome. What do you
actually at the YMCA right outside.
Right outside this door?
No way.
Yeah, I worked
The
at
one
two
that we can see?
locations, and that's one of them. Yeah.
That's amazing. So what do you do with students then? So what does it look like week to week for you?
Yeah, well, I'm the student pastor at our campus. So I actually lead a small group of freshman guys. I just started leading that group. I get to lead our team in recruiting and developing small group leaders and planning programming services, just kind of overseeing the direction of the ministry.
Well, I think this is going to be a great episode to have your voice on because you are a student pastor and a small group leader. So you kind of see both ends of this spectrum of what we're talking about today, which is engaging unengaged students in youth ministry. So let's go ahead and jump into this. So we all work with students. We all know what it looks like to have those students who are super engaged. They're every week, every Sunday, every Wednesday, whatever it is. And then you have that group who is a little more disengaged, who come once a month or every other month, or they have seasons where they're there 3 weeks in a row and then you don't see them for 2 months. And those are the students that I think, if we're honest, are sometimes kind of hard to care about. Like, we care about them, we love them, but it's hard to make them our number one priority because we're so focused on the ones who are in the room often from week to week. But this is really all about those students. So my first question is, who is the unengaged student in youth ministry and what do they look like?
Well, can I take us backwards for a second?
Yes.
I think first, before we dive into that, I think we need to talk about why it's important, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that's like a passion point for me right now. I think this is an area that I've missed the mark over the last couple of years because oftentimes it's easy as a student ministry leader or student pastor or small group leader to kind of see the end goal as graduating students who know Jesus.
Yep.
But that is not the goal. The goal is graduating students who continue to follow Jesus for the rest of their life. And unengaged students is such a big idea. It's such a big topic because what we don't want to happen is for students to check in sporadically throughout middle school and high school and then give up on their faith when they become adults. And so we want to leverage the time that we have with them to the best of our ability so that as adults will continue to follow Jesus and raise kids who follow Jesus as well. And so I think it's important just to step back and go, why is this important? Why does it even matter that there's kids who come in and out when we have 15 good ones? It's because we want those students to continue to follow Jesus in the long haul.
Engaged students grow. That's the deal. You want to grow in a relationship with Jesus, engaged students grow. And the ones that most need to be in church are the ones that are going to be the easiest most easily disengage.
Yep.
You know what I mean? That's the French students. Those are the ones we're really fighting for. The Christian kids that we love that come all the time, like, they're important, but I don't have to fight so hard for them.
Right.
It's the ones. I think the first question, CJ, honestly, beyond that is, do you know who's being disengaged?
Yeah.
And now, when we all started with smaller student ministries, immediately, like you said, if you got 30 students and 15 show regularly, you probably know the 15 that aren't there.
Right.
But once you start to get even beyond that, like, so we have student ministries listening that have 75, 100, 125, 200, 300, all and up.
Yeah.
Do you know? And when do you know?
Yeah.
Do you know that someone's disengaged? And when do you know? How long does it take a student to start being engaged before you tune in? Where has she been?
Well, usually
do you
they're
have a
the
system
ones-
for that?
They're the ones who remind you that they disengaged when they show up 2 months later, and they're like, "Oh, okay."
And that's the worst case scenario, is that somebody shows back up and you go, holy cow, I haven't seen this guy in 5 months.
It's like, where have you
I just dropped the
been?
ball.
Right.
So I think just for starters is like, are we aware?
I think also an unengaged student could be a student who's there, especially in middle school. You don't have as much of a choice whether you can go or not.
That's a great
So
point.
a lot of
Yeah,
times the
that's-
unengaged student is there. They're just not engaged in what's happening, whether it's in small group or large group. They don't want to play the game. They don't want to talk to anyone. They just want to hold the wall up, in the back of the room. And so I think that reaching those students might be a different strategy than the ones who
Right.
aren't actually physically
And
there.
the question then is who would recognize either a student's actual absence or mental absence
Right.
in a room? And I mean, I think we know the answer to that is it's going to be a relationship. Right?
Yeah, I
It's
was just
be
going to
people.
say, we might be jumping the gun a little bit, but I think it all comes down to relationship. Because even Ashley, to your point, like students engage in different ways, and so the kid who's standing on the back wall with his arms folded may actually be super engaged, but
Right.
he's a processor or he's more of an introvert, and so he gets to small group and goes, "Oh my gosh, I had this thought," or he tells his leader one-on-one, "Hey, like 3 messages ago really spoke to me, and here's how, and this is what's changed my life as a result," and you just can't tell in the room. And so at the end of the day, like I think relationship is where we're going to end up landing with this conversation, is do you have a system in
Right.
place to build relationships with students so you can tell when a student isn't there, or you can tell when a student is there and is not engaged.
Right.
Yeah.
So
It's good.
Relationship is king. I mean, we say it in our world all the time that we have students that are attracted to programs, but they stick to relationships. And so, I mean, you want to engage a student, give them an amazing relationship. You want to make sure you don't miss a student, make sure they have an amazing relationship, because you're not going to know, but their small group leader will.
But we all know those students who, like, no matter how hard you pursue them, they're like, I don't want a relationship with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're like not interested in having
Thanks,
that
but no thanks.
relationship, but that's the
Yeah.
only person who has time to chase them. So how do we engage those students?
Yeah, and I would also I know that we're going to get to the relationships part and talk about what that even looks like practically, because I do think that is the answer, but honestly, I don't know if that's always the most helpful answer, because as a small group leader, and Gerald, you might even attest to this, like as a small group leader, you're like, yes, my relationship matters with my students, but it's still not helping them show up, if that makes sense. So, and I think we're having the conversation in reverse a little bit, because the answer is relationships. Now it comes down to a relationship. Now I have to find out why they're disengaging.
Sure.
So I think it even backs up one step from there, like, okay, and which is actually one of the first questions I, brought up here was, what does the unengaged student look like? What's causing them to disengage?
Yeah.
Because as having a relationship with that kid, I'm the one who knows if they're engaging or disengaged, but I have to find out why now too. Does that
Are
make
you
sense?
asking what the main reasons usually are?
Yeah.
There's guys that get busy. They have sports. Sports on Sundays are just killing it. They're killing church. There's like the popularity. I got a girlfriend angle, or there's I feel like I've been partying too hard, or hooking up too much, and now I can't come to church. I'm just choosing a different path in life, and I'm less excited about Jesus. Or then there's I don't like my small group, so I don't come. Or I didn't like the sermon, it's boring, I'm not going to come. I mean, whatever it is,
Is that really the majority of the students who are disengaging? Those who, the sports, don't love their small group, or is it?
I don't know if there's one that's a majority. But
I think I'd add to that list, they don't feel known by anyone, whether it's like someone
That's
their
huge.
age or an adult leader, but also, I guess I'm thinking mostly middle school students, they don't know how to engage sometimes.
Yeah.
Like they don't know how to start a conversation about that, or they don't even know what words you're asking them to say in response to something. So I think sometimes that's an issue.
yeah, I think I would define unengaged as a student who is no longer choosing to take steps in their relationship with Jesus.
That's awesome.
And whether that's a step could be showing up to program, a step could be speaking up in small group, a step could be signing up for an event, a step could be serving somewhere in the church. But when a student decides, I'm not taking any more steps, I would say they're no longer engaged. Because I think it gets into murky waters. For example, like what you were saying, Jamie, like a student who plays sports, who's on the football team, might check out for the whole fall. I don't know that I would say they're automatically unengaged.
Yeah.
They just may not be able to attend
yeah,
your
they can't
program,
come. Yeah.
But just because they're not
They're
attending
still
your
talking to
program.
their small group leader. They're
Exactly.
still, yeah.
Yep. So I think if you decide to stop taking steps, you get stagnant.
Yeah.
Then that's an unengaged student.
Well, I think that drives at the heart of what we also need to define, which is how do you define the engaged student? And it's choosing to take steps in your faith.
Yeah.
But I think most youth pastors, youth leaders, and small group leaders define engaged as attendance.
Right. I was going to say, I think most of our listeners, when they heard this title, were thinking, "Oh, my students who stopped coming or aren't coming as much."
Yeah.
I would imagine, because that's one of my first thoughts.
And that's
when I hear
a
that
big
word.
part of it too, though. Like you can't
for
dismiss
sure.
it all as they're not coming, but they're still super engaged. Like there's a balance there to it.
Well, there's a difference between being engaged in their faith and engaged in your program. And they may be engaged in their faith through a different program, and it might be
Yeah.
at their school.
Yeah.
And that's okay too.
That's great. Wow, that's huge.
I do think what Gerald's talking about, and it's been a trend, I think, in our particular church, kind of across the board, is we're talking less and less about attendance, and we're talking more about engagement, like literally that word. Because attendance sounds like an us metric. Like we checked you off in our environment, we got to report your number.
Yeah.
Engagement is a them metric. It's just what Gerald was saying. You're taking steps of getting connected in a group. You're serving. You're inviting friends. Whatever your metrics are for that. But I think that's the bottom line of ministry is engagement more than simply attendance.
Right.
And Jamie, so you were saying a minute ago that there are all these different reasons why students are not engaged. It's the sports, it's stuff going on Sunday. It's, I live in maybe different homes on the weekend, so I can only come every other week
That's
and
a
be
big
engaged, right? And you said, there's basically unlimited reasons why a student could be engaged, and it all comes down to relationship. So where does that leave us as youth leaders? Is it we just hand it to the small group leaders, or what is our role in this? Because there is not a one-size-fits-all reason students disengage, and there's not a one-size-fits-all.
I think there's more to it than relationships. I will say that. I think there's other factors to get re-engage, but I think relationships is the number one. So if you're a student pastor and you feel like you're more of a program-driven ministry, I would just suggest really move hard to being a relationships-driven one. It doesn't mean you don't have a program. It just means your program serves relationships rather than relationships serve the program.
Yeah.
So if you are a one-stop shop where everyone shows up and they get a download, like a content deliverable and a worship experience, and there's not a relationship, I would strongly encourage you to consider what it'd look like for you personally in your church to go, I'm going to build in relationships everywhere around here because that's the most sticky thing and the most engaging thing to a student in the long run.
So what you mean by that is like you build time in for the students to connect to each other, and then students to connect to volunteers.
Exactly.
You mean into the program time.
Into it, yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yes.
And then the flip side of that is if you're 100% relational and you're coming and you're going, go to small group, you're going to have a Bible lesson in your small group and you're going to talk about it in your small group, I would suggest starting to look at your program and thinking, what are some things that are going to attract students, that are going to make them want to show up, that are going to make them talk about it at school on Monday. That's one of the big things that we talk about often is like, hey, what did we do tonight that students are going to talk about tomorrow? And if there's not that, if there's not a level of excitement, if there's not a level of unpredictability, then students eventually are going to go, I know what's going to happen tonight. I have other options. I don't know if I'm going to
So good, especially
Yeah.
if it's predictable and if your program is always going to ask the students to respond the same way. And maybe that's just not the way a student responds to an activity or a question. So that's why it's important to like kind of mix things up too, because every student will feel comfortable responding differently.
Yeah. The way I like to say it is predictably unpredictable.
Predictably
right?
unpredictable.
And so you want to be predictable enough that a student can invite a friend and go, this is going to be amazing. They're going to sing songs. There's going to be some teaching. We're going to hang out in our small group and be able to connect relationally. These are some factors that are always going to be the same. But then outside of that, everything else is on the wall. Everything else can be different, can look different. But students knowing this is going to be fun, it's going to be amazing, we're going to have some relational connection, there's going to be teaching, there's going to be worship, kind of sets the foundation for them to be able to invite friends and know what to expect.
Yeah, so if you're trying to turn dials in your programming piece, we just talked about relationships. Another big one's your program, obviously. So like what Gerald's talking about, you have the music part. You maybe you need to focus on the quality and the power of your worship experience. Like what could you do to up that? What could you do in worship? Students go, dude, I can't miss worship time this week because of who's leading or how it's led or whatever. I mean, you're working with what you're working with, right? Some of us have access to contractors. Some of us just have in-house people, whatever. It's not just. I have in-house people that are phenomenal. Or another one is your games and your hosting. Like, do you do something once a month or every once in a while that students are like, holy cow, it's Insta story time. It's like, I'm putting this on freaking Instagram because that was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Your talks, like Gerald had this awesome idea for us with what was the series where we were up in the mountains and valleys and caves. We were doing Elijah, and the idea was instead of just talking about Elijah on the mountain, let's like preach from the top of a mountain, like on a what was it?
Lift.
A lift. Yeah. And so again, it was just like, dude, who knew that we were going to be preaching on top of a deal? It was it was unforgettable. So maybe in your talks, like, what dial do you need to turn in your programming? Is it a hosting fun element? Is it a worship, emotion element in the music? Is it my talks? I need to ramp up the creative and the helpful. But you need to do something almost every week. The students go, that was worth stopping playing Fortnite for. That was worth getting off of my couch or hanging with my girls to come and show up with. Because that was incredible.
Yeah, I would just add to your agenda every week when you meet with your team or as you sit down and plan the week, if you're on staff by yourself, what am I doing this week? What are we doing this week that students are going to talk about tomorrow? And if you can answer that question, that's a good thing. And knowing that didn't happen is also a good thing, right? Like it kind of helps keep you in check. So I would add to your agenda as you're planning and programming and thinking about Sunday, what are we doing this week that students are going to talk about tomorrow?
And I think I'd add to that as well. If you want students to engage with your program, you need to engage with them outside of the program.
Yeah.
And I think also if you want them to engage with you while you're on stage, you need to engage with them while you're off stage, because that's going to fill the relational gap that's missing.
Yeah. So I want to paint a picture for you, because I think we could talk about this too as far as these unengaged students. They show up in different parts of a program or a ministry, I think, too. Like there's what's happening, during the hosting or the game. It's what's happening during small group. They could disengage. It could be happening during a talk. So I want to paint a picture of, there's a 16-year-old guy. The game was cool. That was great. He thought that was cool. And now you're 10 minutes into your message, and he's leaning on the back wall, sitting at the back wall, uninterested. Maybe he's on his phone. Maybe he's staring at you, but he's just not buying it.
Sure.
What does it look like to begin to engage that student who's like, okay, all right, I don't know if I'm going to come back next week anymore. Like,
you mean in that moment?
Yeah.
Well, I would have first said your main moment was during the week when you planned your talk. If your student's on the back wall with his arms crossed.
Yeah.
And there's something that didn't happen in the first 5-10 minutes of your talk that needed to happen.
Yeah.
And what is that?
Is that, I say it like this. You got to get their eyes off their phone to your face. You got to say something that meets them where they are, not just where you want them to be.
Yeah.
You don't start with, let's open our Bibles to whatever, though you can. You start with something that they can't resist thinking about. Hey, have you ever thought about it? Have you ever struggled with? Have you ever wondered? Have you ever run into this problem? And they're going, totally. I didn't know we talked about stuff like that at church. What's he going to say?
Yeah.
I was actually going to say, don't assume that person's not engaged.
Right.
Because them sitting against the back wall looking at their phone might be the very thing they need to do, because what you said stirred something in them that made them feel uncomfortable or made them feel it. And the only way they know how to maybe process through that information is look down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Depending on the kid.
That's true. That's true.
That's true. But I also think you can raise the bar in the middle of your talk too. I mean,
Right.
one of the things I love doing is going, hey, some of you in the room right now are crazy enough to do this. Some of you in the room right now are going to take the step, and others of you, this is too big for you to do. So I get it. If you want to check out right now, that's totally fine. But for those of you in the room who are really serious about following Jesus, here's something I want you to do. And so at that point, you've now told the kid, hey, if your arms are crossed, then this isn't for you. And then all of a sudden they're like, I want this to be for me, and it helps them check back in. I literally remember it was last week, I was speaking at an event, and there were students laughing in the middle of my gospel presentation. And I just said, hey, for some of you right now, you've heard this 1,000 times, and this is a joke for you, and you are totally laughing this off. And I looked at the kids who were laughing. I go, but for others of you, you're sitting next to that kid and you want to decide to follow Jesus. Yeah. This moment is for you. And you watch kids go, oh crap, he low key called me out and I didn't even, you know what I mean?
I love it.
And you don't have to be aggressive, hey, you shut up. But I think there's ways that you can elevate the standard and raise the bar.
Yeah. I mean, you can ramp up your energy. You can you can ramp up your energy, or you can also go down. People notice a big change in energy or in pace, and they kind of go. I'll notice every now and then if I see eyes going down, and I'm like, one, dang it, But then I'll either take it one way or the other, and you'll see them go, what's he doing?
Yeah.
So you're a master at that, Jamie. You're really, really with your vocal inflections and picking moments to go up, go down. You're really, really good at that. Bro. Yeah, dude.
The other thing I'll do is if I actually see the kid, this hypothetical kid, I literally do. Now, it's harder the bigger room that you have. It's harder to do this. But if you actually see the kid, I'm gonna go find him when I'm done. 100%. I'm literally I walk off stage. I'm like, yeah. And I'm gonna go find the kid. I'm gonna talk to him, introduce myself.
So just to create a relational connection.
Yeah. Well, see, guys like me and girls like Ashley, and I think a lot of us believe if I can just talk to someone, I can connect with them.
Of
I bet I
course.
can get them excited. And I really genuinely believe that. So I'm like, I can love on this dude and I can get him interested. I can at least give him a reason to come back if I can just get a chance to talk to him.
I think that goes back to what Ashley was saying earlier, right? Like, you can't have a relationship on stage if you don't have it off stage. And so there's something that happens when a student knows who you are, that they automatically want to check in just out of respect for you as a person, right? And so I think to Ashley's point, it's like, hey, well, go find that kid, or to what Jamie was saying, go find that kid afterwards and ask him his name and get to know him. And next time, like, give him a shout out. Like, yo, I was talking to Jason last week, man.
So
Like,
good.
he's an incredible, you know what I mean? Like, and use those moments, build relationships off stage, and then leverage them on stage where you can.
I think that's so good. And with social media too, you can interact with students during the week when you're preparing. So you know which students you're like, oh, they're going to check out at this topic. But if I can somehow get them involved in my prep, like, hey, I'm getting ready for this. What do you guys think about this part?
That's good. Yeah.
Or if it's that student that's never engaging with anybody, find out what they're interested in.
Yeah.
If they do have a social media account, I know most high schoolers do, half of middle schoolers do. And if it's not something that they have, maybe their family does. So just stalk them and find out something that they do know about and ask them about that. Like, that's one of my favorite ways to engage a student who doesn't think I'm cool is figure out what they know about and tell them you need them to teach you so that you're cool.
Yeah.
And they're like, yes.
I love that too. And I love these suggestions, Gerald, Ashley, Jamie, just because I also think from a small group leader's perspective, I'm sitting here thinking I'm not on the stage. I already have a relationship with these guys. And so I can't create that spark. And I think a lot of youth pastors might feel that way too. Like, well, I've only got 15 students. There's not really an on and off stage for me, but I can still, throughout the week, I can be reaching out to these guys, creating those relational connections. And it creates that similar spark that, like, hey, I'm reaching out, I'm connecting with you. I just personalize this. Yeah. Whether you're a speaker on stage, or whether you're a small group leader engaging after or during the week, like, all of a sudden I'm creating a relational spark that is a little more intentional than just a large group or even a small group room where I've got 10 guys.
I think the pursuit is so key. I said that's a great word. I thought you got, number one, you got to be able to identify. Do you even know when someone's checking out? And besides a visual cue, do you know when they're absent, for example, or they're checking out in the room, like you were saying, Ashley? But the second piece of that is then, are you prepared, equipped, or do you have the systems or the people to actually then do something about it? Mm-hmm. So, like, so-and-so's disconnected. Okay, so what? Who's going to do something about that? Yeah. Is it me? Am I calling him? Mm-hmm. Is there a small group leader in her life who's going to reach out and say, hey, I missed you. Where were you? I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks, or whatever. So there's the pursuing the student. And usually I think you want to have a volunteer leader because, as a pastor, you can only do that with so many students, right?
Right.
The piece I sometimes forget about, especially in middle school and especially with 9th and 10th graders whose parents are bringing them, is the parents. So I just the other week I had a group where I was noticing 4 girls, they just weren't coming. And the leader's like, I tried texting them, I haven't heard back. And I'm like, I'm just going to email their parents. And not in a tattletale kind of way. I was like, hey, I haven't seen the girls, just want to check in. How's group going? Is there anything we could do to make it more engaging? Every single parent responded. Yeah. And 2 of them were like, oh my gosh, we've just been so busy. We need to reprioritize. So it cued them to come back.
Yeah.
And then the other 2, they were like, well, one of them had a legit issue. Like, one girl in the group was mean to her. We were able to resolve it just by, the girl didn't want to talk about it.
Right.
The parents were like, yeah, so-and-so said my daughter was a blank, blank, blank. And yep. Oh, I'm sorry. Well,
and you were so happy you called.
Yes. So, sometimes.
Another reason girls disengage.
I know.
You got the sports and you got the blankety blank stuff going on, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say to that, Jamie, like, I think that's a tension that oftentimes student pastors can feel. Like, I know I feel this tension is we run a small group modeled ministry. I don't want to step on the toes of my small group leaders and go, hey, like, I know these are your students. I probably shouldn't get to know them or like invest in them or hang out with them or reach out to their parents. Like, that feels like I'm kind of stepping into your boundary. But at the end of the day, like, God has entrusted you with the student ministry. And there are times where, as the student pastor, it's good and okay for you to step in and build relationships with students, even if they have another small group leader. I don't think there's ever going to be a point where a student has too many Christians investing in them, right? So I think it's okay. It's a tension that I feel at times. It's like, I want to hang out with students. I want to know students, but you're also in a small group, and you should do that with your leader. I think we have to get rid of that and just go,
you
hey.
kind of want to apologize. You're like, oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to get in your way.
Yeah.
I just think when it comes to engagement, and this type of disengagement it may be you have the first time non-Christian kid sort of checking it out, disengagement, the back wall, arms crossed. I don't know if I'm bought in. The other side of that is, I think Gerald or Ashley, y'all brought this up, was like, it's the Christian kid who's like, I'm bored. I've been here since 5th grade. Like literally, and then now they're a senior, you know, or they're a junior, or they've been here since birth in our church, you know.
I was born in the nursery.
And they're like, I'm bored.
I'm a Christian since I was born.
I've heard all these songs. I've heard all this stuff. Jamie preached on that passage once already. Ugh, you know?
Right.
And you're like, it's, you know, shut up, it's awesome. But no, I think one of the huge ingredients to re-engaging that student is not more of the same. Meaning, I just need a little bit better talk or a little bit more powerful worship. I think you got to move into the realm of vision and of serving. I think that starts to ignite their heart, because we've talked about this all the time in various realms. Christianity can turn into an all-you-can-eat buffet, and then soon you're just like, you're so full, you're about to vomit, and you're like, I can't eat anymore. And it's like, no wonder. All you've been doing is taking. It's time to give. And so scheduling times to ignite your students about what this is about, their friends who aren't here, loving our city or our town, and then actually giving them opportunities to go and do that. That's engaging. We have students that come senior year just because they serve. They don't care about me anymore. They don't care about, small group, they can meet outside and go to dinner for all they care. But they come on Sundays because they matter. They have to serve.
Wow, so that's great.
Yeah, that's really good. I think another thing for the Christian kid that you can do, and it's not really like a strategy or anything, but it's a way to challenge students. I often ask my seniors or students who go, I've heard all of this before. Yeah. Go, okay, that's legitimate. You have probably heard this multiple times over the last 3 or 4 years. Can I just ask you a question? Do you still hook up with your boyfriend or girlfriend? Do you still drink every now and then? Do you smoke ever? Do you still sin? Oh, okay. So you want me to stop talking about the thing that you're still doing? How about this? Let's work on a plan for you to no longer do that thing, and then I'll stop talking about it because you won't need me to say it anymore. And I think sometimes students just need a punch in the gut to go, hey.
And then they cry.
we are fallen beings.
That's awesome.
So we're going to fall short often. And we constantly need to be reminded of A, our need for a savior, and B, that we need to get things right, that we need to change, that we need to, be sanctified and make different decisions. And so sometimes I just think that's a student's excuse for not wanting to be challenged for the things that they're doing.
That's so good.
Wow.
I think another way to engage students, especially as the communicator, is when you do build attention, making sure you have like a variety of examples for kids who have maybe been raised in church. Maybe they're thinking this. For someone who's brand new to church, maybe you're thinking this, but not just in the tension section, also in the application. Like, all right, now that this is the truth, if you already have a relationship with God, I want to encourage you to do this. If you are unsure about this God thing, I encourage you to take this step, and kind of give a bunch of different steps, so it's not just like one size fits all.
Yeah. I love that. That's great.
That's right. It's great.
So I want to ask Gerald and Jamie, you two lead student ministries. Yeah. Do you guys actually have like a plan for engaging these kinds of disengaged students, or is it just you have to feel it and it's situation by situation, case by case? Because if I'm a youth leader and I'm listening to this, I'm like, this just feels like a lot of random ideas in a way, and each one's, I've got to take it as they come. Or is there something more on the leadership side of the ministry thing that can be implemented here? Yeah,
well, I was just going to say our student ministry is actually stealing something that Jamie's student ministry has been doing for a little bit now. So I'd love for you to talk about the red, yellow, green system that y'all put in place for small group leaders.
Yeah, dude. So every small group leader has a Google Doc. We talked about this.
We've talked about this before, but go ahead.
Whatever.
I can't even remember the episode. It was like a year ago.
So every small group has a dashboard. It's a Google Doc, and it's got green, yellow, and red. Green are students that are like all the way plugged in. Yellow are students that are like, man, I haven't seen them in a while, or I've had a couple cues where they're like disengaged. Red is I feel like they're disconnected, or especially for freshman year, it's like I've never even met a student who they were just on my roll, or they moved or whatever. And the whole point of it is that the small group leader has up-to-date information, and we're trying to reduce the time between disengagement and our awareness. Yeah. That's the whole point. Is that when an event happens in a girl's life, she gets disengaged. The small group leader, because they're checking regularly, is like, wait a minute, we haven't seen her in a while, and then they respond. So Was that?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I think that's a system that we're building
Yeah.
that you guys already have in place that helps us identify, hey, that's an unengaged student. We need to go pursue them. We need to chase after them. I think the other thing is the question.
From an attendance perspective,
Yeah.
From an
primarily.
attendance perspective. I think the other thing is the question that we were talking about earlier. Like our team sits down every week and we go, what are we doing this week?
Yeah.
That are going to make students talk on Monday and that are going to make students come back next week. Because we really do believe every week students are deciding whether or not they're going to show up.
Yeah.
And so every week we have to make it compelling for them to be there.
Right.
So I think those are a couple of things we're doing.
Here,
Yeah.
I'll give you another. Sorry, let me talk on the mic. I think one more from a leadership ministry planning perspective is always having something to look forward to. So a rhythm of events. And now it doesn't, this is not just for those of you who have big budgets and big ministries that can go to a big camp or do one on your own. It doesn't matter whether you got 20 or 15 or 500, that there should always be something on the horizon that's out of the ordinary. So for example, you're looking forward to summer camp. And they're like, oh, I can't wait for summer camp to get there. Well, when that's over, is it, let's wait for summer camp the next year? No. We do back to school bash when we kick off the school year. And it's a complete marked departure from the average inside out. It's hype. It's crazy. Let's invite your friends. But when that's over, it's not like, well, we'll wait 6 months. No, the next is vertical reality or
Fall retreat.
Fall retreat, yeah. But then we have a Christmas party. Then we have a New Year's kickoff. Then there's always something. Now that sounds like a lot. I'm not saying you got to have that many. And we have by the way, our spring retreat called My Life. That's an in-town overnight, kind of a DNOW deal.
Yeah.
And then we're back at summer camp. But the point is, there is the norm. There's the normal inside out. We're grinding out every week. And every week we're asking, or Gerald's question of what are we doing this week?
What are we doing tonight?
But
that
over
students will talk
top of
about.
that, there's this rhythm of extraordinary excitement that they know is coming, and it builds, and it's just constantly building. I think that's a massively effective engagement tool.
Yeah, that's great.
It breaks monotony, is what it does.
Yeah.
And that's as we begin to wrap up here. That's on the programming side, and that's a huge piece, like you were saying a few minutes ago. Like there's the big programming side, and then there's the relational side too. And I think that is, an excellent the question that you mentioned. That what are we doing tonight? The students will talk about tomorrow. That's your almost week to week question. And then there's the what are we looking forward to month to month? Season to season. Those are great cues to provide programming opportunities for students to engage.
Yeah.
And I guess my last question would be, what about the relational side? How on earth do you cue your small group leaders to be on the lookout for this on a relationship, person-to-person, week-to-week basis to engage the students who are maybe disengaging at a level that you can't see on a roster or attendance sheet?
I was going to say one is that roster thing. I think being aware of absence.
Yeah.
But
yeah, for sure.
I think another habit is I tell my leaders, or I tell them, I think a keystone habit is I want you to check in with your co-leader. We always have co-leaders, but check in with them before you leave. Like, is there anybody in your group that you got that feeling about? Like, I don't know, I don't feel like she's or he is engaged. Like, who are your at-risk students? To me, that's like a simple habit.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just be a person and recognize when somebody's disengaged. I mean,
yeah. I would say don't settle for small group time. Build in one-on-ones in your routine. Build in going to their events and their football games and their plays and their dramas. And I mean, it's more proactive than reactive. You don't have to worry about having disengaged students if you choose to engage them often. And so if you're having one-on-ones and going, hey, how's life? How's your family doing? How's, whatever. If you have a pulse on their life, you don't have to worry about them getting disengaged because you're constantly engaging them.
So
that's what
And so don't settle for small group time. Look for opportunities to connect with students individually as well.
I think another system you should have in place is anytime a student isn't there, they get a text. Every time. Hey, we missed you. If you're in a place, then every time you're not there, you're missed, you like that place.
Yep.
That's
Hey,
good.
I missed you, bro.
Yeah.
That was sweet. And then, you get that for 4 weeks straight. And eventually, you don't want to be annoying. Maybe that's when you go to a second tier in the system. It's like, hey, let's grab coffee. I want to hear how things are going. And what you really are doing is checking in. Like, I haven't seen you in forever. Or maybe it's an email to the parent like we talked about. But I think you should have some triggers.
Yeah.
It's just so hard. I'm sitting here thinking about like being a small group leader.
Yeah, me
and
too.
knowing, you have like 15 people, let's say, on your roster for 15 students, and then you have 10 who come, 3 who didn't come because they're engaged in football season or basketball season or whatever, 2 who maybe haven't shown up. there's a crisis that happened in group, something happened in the community. I mean, there's a million things happening.
Sure.
And it's hard as a small group there. I would assume most people listening don't have 2 volunteers per group.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's just so much to ask of a volunteer.
And I'm in that same boat too, Ashley, as far as like, okay, I just finished up an 8th grade group and I just started working with another 6th grade group. And I've got 17 guys on my roster and we're just starting. So we have, at the time we're recording this, I just started working with this new group and I had 7 come yesterday. And so most of them don't have phones still because they're in sixth grade, just to play devil's advocate on the other end of that spectrum.
Sure.
But you know, to Jamie's point, I've got to be a human and I've got to figure out what it looks like to engage them from week to week, even as they are in 6th
they on
grade.
Snap?
Yeah.
Chat?
Well, no.
Instant?
Well, because they don't have phones.
They don't have that on
So, but a lot of them don't yet. So it's probably like 30% do or 40% do. So I feel your tension just to validate what you were saying there, Ashley. It is hard, but it is something that's on my plate. Like, okay, I've got to figure out what it looks like to engage, you know, the 9 6th grade guys who weren't there yesterday. And maybe that's through their parents right now. And then as it gets to 7th grade, you know, as we add more cell phones to the group, we transition from engaging through the parents to engaging the students directly too.
Yeah.
But it is a challenge.
I think with this whole conversation, right, like you have to pursue the ideal, which is what we're talking about, and then embrace what's real.
Right.
Yeah.
And based off of your staffing model, based off of your budget, based off of your time, your capacity, like how many volunteers you have access to, how many you already have recruited, like you have to listen to all of it and go, okay, this is all ideal. Yeah. In reality, what can we do?
Right.
What's one thing we can start to do differently? And I think that'll move the needle a little bit. And the goal is to move the needle. It's not to be perfect because we all have a long way to go and none of us can hit the ideal.
And we all have a lot to do.
Yeah, we all have a lot to do.
So. And just a personal challenge too for any youth pastor listening. I mean, we can ask our volunteers to do this because they're the ones who are sitting with our kids every week. But if we're not doing it for our volunteers, like we really have room to ask them to do with our students.
Yeah,
and it's hard. It's a lot of people to connect with.
Yeah.
So if I were asking myself in this podcast, what do I do? What I've heard today, I know this is kind of your job. I was going to say, I feel like
Jamie,
there's a couple dials we've identified.
Let's wrap this conversation up, and you take the reins.
No. I don't want to end it. I just wanted to say I would challenge. This is what
It's the wrap up question. You're good.
My parting challenge.
Yeah.
I would take one of these dials, and I would turn one of them. We talked about relationships. We talked about programming. We talked about the serving element. We talked about having a rhythm of events.
It's good.
I would pick one of those and go, where do I most need to engage the disengaged?
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Because this is, it's a big wandering conversation. I was just trying to make it simple.
No, I totally get it. And that's it is a really big idea. And there is no one size fits all solution, but pick a dial and start working on that. Gerald, do you have anything before we wrap up?
Jamie Dickens just covered it. The man, the myth, the legend. That is it. No, I agree. I think if you can pick one of those 4 dials and turn one, figure out the area that you're the weakest and work on that, I think it's great.
Yeah, that's great. Ashley?
I was just going to say, I think you never arrive. It's like always a process and you're always growing this. It's always changing. It's more of an art than a science.
Right. It's like a marathon that never ends.
Yes.
So good luck.
It's relentless.
Good luck.
Constant.
Kind of like the song that never ends.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I was going to start singing it, but that's your job usually to sing songs on podcasts. So
Not this
Hey, not to
podcast.
over spiritualize, but we didn't mention, one of the things you can do is like just pray.
Yeah.
For them.
We're a Christian
God,
podcast.
I'm praying
We can
that you
talk
will
about
intervene in their life and their circumstances to recapture their heart, work in the relationship, do something in our program that makes that student go, I gotta lean back in.
Yeah.
Because God does that stuff all the time and we don't even know it.
That's true.
So, man, don't forget that. Pray for somebody in Jesus' name.
Yeah, if you can't text your 6th grade guy, maybe pray for him too.
Please do
Even
that.
if you can text them, pray for them.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining this conversation. You guys brought a lot of great ideas to the table, and I know that you guys do this week in and week out. So this is really, really helpful stuff, and I think that this is going to really challenge some of us in great ways. So thanks for joining us for this conversation, and thank you for listening to this week's episode of Rethinking Youth Ministry. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast through your podcast app. And finally, for more great resources, to check out the show notes for this episode and to links to follow Jamie and Gerald and
Get outta here.
Ashley on social media. We'll have links to all of that stuff. You can check out some of the work that they're doing in their student ministries. The links will be on our show notes, and you can find those at rethinkingym.org. Until next time, thank you for listening.